The SUV coughed once before falling silent. Its door opened and Harlan West stepped out. His coat hung loose, creased along the sleeves. No watch, no suitcase, only a black card resting in his hand. The valet's eyes slid over him, then away, chasing the gleam of a silver sports car that pulled up behind. Keys were tossed, a grin exchanged, and Harlan was left standing in the cold shine of marble and glass. A pair of guests chuckled, not bothering to lower their voices. "Fake rich, you can tell." Their laughter rippled like broken glass across the lobby. Harlan walked forward, unhurried, his shoes dull against polished stone. At the front desk, Sloane Archer lifted her head. Red lips curved into a smirk. Her gaze lingered on the card, then on his coat. "Are you sure that's yours?" she asked, voice smooth-pointed. The room stirred. Whispers circled, eyes narrowed. 5 minutes. That was all it would take to remember his name. At 17, the jacket on his shoulders sagged too large for his thin frame. The sleeves swallowed his wrists, the collar rubbed against his neck. In his hands, a tray of water trembled, glasses clinking like teeth in the cold. He stood near the kitchen doors, where the smell of bleach and smoke clung to the air. A man in a tailored suit stopped in front of him, eyes hard, lips thin. "Not you," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You don't have the face for VIP." No pause, no second glance, just dismissal. The words settled heavier than the tray itself. Harlan didn't argue, didn't beg. He stepped back into the shadows of the kitchen, swallowed whole by the hiss of steam and the scrape of knives. The shame didn't burn only for that moment. It etched itself deep, a mark not on his body but on his memory. The lesson was cruel, and it stayed. Respect was given to appearances, not to effort. That wound never healed. It hardened. He lingered near the kitchen door, the tray still balanced against his arm. Through the thin crack, light spilled into the dark gold and white. Inside, laughter rose over crystal glasses. Men in pressed suits leaned back in leather chairs, women glittered in silk. Every gesture spoke of belonging of a circle he had no key for. Harlan's eyes fixed on the table on the way, waiters bowed as though the air itself demanded obedience. The tray shifted in his grip. His fingers curled tighter until glass dug into skin. A sharp sting, blood blooming along his palm, but he held firm. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He watched in silence as the door closed again, locking him out. The hurt did not fade into weakness. It transformed brick by brick into a quiet resolve. If he was shut out tonight, it would not be forever. The cold ache in his chest bent toward something harder, a promise to never forget what exclusion felt like. Years later, the memory followed him into a narrow garage. Oil clung to the air, heavy and stale. Rain tapped the leaking roof, slipping through cracks, dripping onto concrete. He sat on a wooden crate bent over a broken laptop, its screen fractured in one corner. The machine wheezed, but the keys still worked. His fingers moved without pause, coding into the night while the world outside slept. No investors came, no mentors knocked on the door. Only silence, hunger, and the faint hum of electricity kept him company. He built not for prestige, not for applause, but because stopping meant surrendering to those words spoken years ago. His body ached, but the lines of code stacked higher. From that damp garage where ambition tasted of rust and rain, he shaped the foundation of Coltech. It wasn't fortune that kept him there, it was defiance. Every click of the keyboard was a rejection of the idea that respect must be earned through appearance. Every line of code whispered the same vow he would not be overlooked again. The first contract collapsed before the ink had dried. A client pulled away, leaving debts stacked higher than the bills on Harlan's desk. Friends told him to cut his losses, to walk away before the struggle consumed him. Their voices circled like crows. "It's over. Save yourself the ruin." He sat alone in the garage, the fractured screen of his laptop glowing dimly in the dark. His reflection wavered in the crack, split and uncertain. For a moment he imagined shutting it all down, abandoning the dream that had carried him out of kitchens and back doors. The rain outside pressed harder, dripping into the silence. His chest tightened with doubt, with exhaustion. Yet his hands did not leave the keyboard. The storm inside him bent toward resolve. He refused to let a single setback define the path ahead. The decision wasn't loud, wasn't heroic. It was a whisper, repeated only to himself. Keep going. The screen flickered and he typed again. What began in a leaking garage spread across cities. Coltech grew in silence, not with fireworks or headlines, but with work that mattered. Hospitals used his algorithms to track vital signs, predicting danger before it arrived. Schools leaned on his systems to guide students through barriers, giving voices to those who struggled to be heard. When disasters struck, Coltech tools mapped shelters, connected families, restored order to chaos. No slogans, no spotlights, just impact that spoke louder than any advertisement. In the office, there were no titles etched onto doors. From janitor to engineer, everyone carried only their first name, nothing more. Harlan insisted on it. Respect was not earned by position, but given at the door. The company's heartbeat was quiet, steady, undeniable. A culture had taken root built not on grandeur, but on recognition of dignity. What grew from oil-stained concrete now reached into lives across the world. Harlan spoke little in meetings. He listened, absorbed, weighed before offering anything. But when he did, it was always the same reminder. Respect isn't earned. It's owed. Simple words without flourish. Yet each time he spoke them, the room fell still. Engineers nodded, executives paused their pens. New hires repeated the line to themselves, uncertain at first, then firm with belief. Over time, it became more than a phrase, it became the spine of the company. Not a motto printed on walls, not a speech rehearsed for investors. A truth lived visible in how one colleague spoke to another and how small kindnesses replaced silent neglect. The paradox was sharp. In a world that measured respect by wealth or power, Coltech demanded the opposite. Here, no one climbed a ladder to be treated well. Here, dignity came first without condition. The reminder never softened, never aged. It echoed again and again until it became who they were. At a grand summit in New York, the ballroom shimmered with gold and glass. Cameras flashed endlessly, chasing silk gowns and diamond cufflinks. CEOs lined the stage, wrists weighed down by watches worth more than houses, shoes polished to blind under chandeliers. When Harlan West entered, no lens turned. He wore a plain shirt sleeves rolled once, no tie, no jewelry. He moved through the crowd unnoticed, like background noise among the spectacle. The press circled the powerful, measuring importance in fabric and shine. Harlan stood at the edge, hands folded loosely, expression unreadable. He never sought their stage lights, never needed them. While others posed, he listened. While they performed, he observed. His absence from the spotlight was not weakness, it was his armor. In a world fueled by performance, his refusal to play revealed something sharper. To be unseen by their rules was exactly the point. He had no need to glitter to matter. Colleagues over the years pulled him aside. You should dress the part, they urged. A suit, a watch, something that matches your name. Harlan only smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. If clothes decide my worth, then I'm not worth a cent. The words traveled through corridors and emails, whispered first with amusement, then carried with respect. Soon they became part of Coltech's bloodstream. Simplicity was not a disguise, it was a declaration. His open collars, worn jackets, unpolished shoes turned into a silent emblem recognized by employees worldwide. He walked into boardrooms where wealth was stitched into every pocket square, and yet his very plainness unsettled the room. There was no costume to hide behind, no armor but his own conviction, and that more than fabric became his brand. For his people he embodied the idea that dignity was not borrowed from threads, it was inherent, owed, and unshakable. The marble stretched wide beneath his shoes, polished to a mirror reflecting the ceiling's cold glow. Harlan paused at the threshold of the hotel lobby. For an instant, he was 17 again, standing outside the kitchen, excluded by a single sentence. The memory pressed against him, sharp and alive. But he was no longer the boy holding a trembling tray. The years of scars and triumphs had turned him into something else, a man who could test the world without a word. He advanced slowly, the weight of silence following each step. Guests turned, glancing briefly, dismissing the man in the worn coat. He reached the front desk. Without flourish, without hesitation, he laid the black card on the counter. It rested there, dark against marble, small but absolute. The test was set. No announcement was needed. The trial was about to begin, and the room did not yet know it was already failing. The black card lay between them, sharp against the white marble. Sloane Archer's gaze slid down to it, then back to Harlan. Her lips curved, her brows arched with mock disbelief. "Are you sure that's yours?" The word "you" landed like a blade, stretched, long and deliberate. The air thickened. A couple nearby turned their heads, eyes narrowing with quiet amusement. They waited for him to stammer, to explain himself. Harlan's expression did not shift. He stood, steady hands at his sides, gaze fixed on Sloane, calm as stone. His silence unsettled, more cutting than denial, more unnerving than anger. But Sloane mistook it for weakness, leaning back with a flicker of satisfaction. In that moment, the card became more than plastic. It was a mirror reflecting her scorn more clearly than her own words. The confrontation had begun, and the fault lines in the room had already started to crack. The silence did not last. From the lounge, a burst of laughter broke through. A group of young men smirked openly, one of them muttering just loud enough cosplay billionaire. Their shoulders shook as they nudged each other, emboldened by the receptionist's smirk. Near them, an older man shook his head with visible contempt, the kind reserved for someone beneath notice. Behind Harlan, the valet let out a quiet chuckle, not bothering to mask it, certain the joke was safe. The room tilted further, a chorus of ridicule closing in, circling him like smoke. No one stepped forward, no voice rose in defense. Harlan remained still, his eyes not rising. His breathing measured the same steadiness that unnerved even in its quiet. Their laughter was a performance, but his silence was heavier. It refused to yield, refused to shrink. Each second of his calmness fed their mockery, yet it also planted unease none of them could name. Order came in the shape of a uniform. The hotel's security guard strode forward, posture-sharp eyes trained on Harlan with suspicion. His voice was polite enough but edged with assumption. "Sir, may I see some identification?" It wasn't a question. It was a verdict waiting to be confirmed. The laughter dimmed into murmurs, shifting into curiosity. Sloane crossed her arms, chin lifted as though the request had validated her judgment. She looked at Harlan like the matter was settled, like the man in front of her had already failed the test she had written for him. Harlan did not move. He did not reach for his pocket. He offered no words to defend himself. He simply stood there, gaze steady, the card still untouched on the desk. His refusal to comply was not defiance but patience, as though he had seen this script play out too many times before. And now, once again, the stage was theirs to reveal themselves. At the edge of the lobby, the valet leaned toward his coworker, lips twisting into a smirk. His words slid out loud enough to wound soft enough to feign privacy. Google Rich forgot to update the wardrobe. His companion's mouth twitched, holding back a laugh, but Chad let his amusement spill, forcing it into the open. The chuckle spread, caught by ears eager for confirmation of their judgment. A woman glanced over eyes, scanning Harlan's coat, then nodded with a knowing smirk as if the insult had sealed the truth. The words drifted like ash, staining the air, gathering weight in silence. Yet Harlan remained as he was, upright, calm, anchored. He didn't flinch, didn't shift. The mockery circled, but it didn't touch him. Instead, it exposed the speaker more than the target, a mark of pettiness disguised as wit. Against the backdrop of polished marble, the valet's laugh felt small, brittle, already breaking under the weight of its own cruelty. Amid the sneers, a younger employee lingered by the hallway. His uniform was slightly loose, his shoes worn at the edges. He paused, caught between duty and instinct. His gaze fell on Harlan, not with scorn, but with recognition. There was no confusion in those eyes, only the heaviness of someone who understood what it meant to be measured by appearance. For a second, his lips parted as though he might say something. A word, a warning, perhaps even a defense. But fear sealed them shut. He lowered his head, shoulders tense, and slipped quietly into the back corridor. Harlan noticed. Their eyes had met in that brief instant, a thread pulled tight and then cut by silence. The boy's retreat said more than any insult. He knew. He had lived the same judgment in smaller ways, and his silence was not betrayal, but survival. In that unspoken moment, respect flowed from the lowest rank, not the highest. Harlan's eyes moved across the lobby, not sharp, not burning, but steady with an older sorrow. He looked at the desk, at the polished floors, at the faces fixed on him with suspicion or disdain. No anger surfaced. Only quiet disappointment, the kind that bites deeper than rage. The memory of 17 returned, the kitchen door, the tray trembling, the voice saying he did not belong. It played again in the silence of the marble lobby decades later, unchanged. His mouth tightened, a subtle press more telling than a shout. The crowd misread it as defeat, but the truth lay heavier. His stillness was not weakness. It was the pause before a decision, a silence so dense it unsettled more than any protest could. The room mistook his calm for surrender, but those who understood silence would have recognized it, the sound of someone remembering the sound of judgment already made in his own mind. Her nails tapped lazily against the keys, the rhythm hollow without purpose. The monitor in front of her stayed blank, no search bar filled, no record retrieved. Still, she lifted her chin eyes, sweeping over him with cold detachment. "I don't see your name here," she said, her voice flat, absent of even the courtesy of doubt. The words slid into the lobby carrying the weight of a verdict. A guest standing nearby tilted his head toward the desk, his lips twisting into a grin as if the humiliation were entertainment. The moment belonged to her, and she wore it like victory convinced her performance would not be questioned. Harlan didn't move. His card still rested where he had placed it, unclaimed, unacknowledged. The tension thickened with every second of her feigned effort, every keystroke that produced nothing. For those watching, the outcome seemed final. The man before them was no one. Yet the stillness in his posture hinted otherwise. At the far side of the lobby, unnoticed by most, a different scene unfolded. An elderly woman struggled with her suitcase, its wheels catching against the polished floor. A girl, no more than 8, stepped forward, her small hands pressing firmly against the handle. Together they moved it a few feet, and the woman's shoulders eased with relief. Their smiles met in quiet understanding, two strangers bound by a simple kindness. Harlan saw it. His eyes softened his chest, lifted with a breath that almost felt lighter. In that fleeting moment, the cruelty around him dimmed, if only slightly. It reminded him why he built what he built, why his company bore the weight of a principle. Respect was not theory. It was action, often unnoticed, often unrecorded. He watched as the child disappeared back into the crowd, the woman's thanks lingering in her eyes. One act of decency in a room full of scorn said everything the others had failed to grasp. The lightness passed quickly. Sloane leaned forward again, her lips curving in a smile sharpened to a sneer. "Perhaps you've come to the wrong hotel," she offered, her tone sugared with mockery. The laughter returned, low but unmistakable, rippling from a cluster of guests who found validation in her words. One man twisted in his chair, eyes locking onto Harlan with thin amusement, as though watching a play meant for his delight. The scene was repeating itself, the judgment piling higher, the assumptions thickening like fog. Through it all, Harlan stood rooted, expression unchanged, gaze steady. He did not reach for his card, did not answer the taunt. The silence that wrapped him was heavier than any rebuttal. To the crowd, it read as defeat, but in truth it was calculation, a patience that let others dig their own pit. The deeper they mocked, the clearer the reckoning would be when silence finally broke. In the corner of the lobby, away from the clusters of polished shoes and hushed derision, a young woman sat with her backpack tucked at her feet. Nora Whitman slid her phone from her jacket and tilted it slightly, the lens catching the man at the counter. She did not speak, did not shift for attention. Her face remained calm, her focus steady. The red light glowed faint, invisible to most, but its weight was immense. With that quiet tap, the story began to shift. The insults, the silence, the indifference, all of it entered her frame. While the room dismissed Harlan, she recorded him, giving permanence to what others thought would vanish in minutes. Her presence was unremarkable, her action almost invisible. Yet it was this invisibility that would matter most. The fate of a billion-dollar deal, the reputation of a hotel, the weight of a culture now rested in the hands of someone no one had noticed. Not far away, another phone was raised, this one careless loud. A guest leaned back in his chair, grinning into his camera. "Fake billionaire check-in," he announced, and his live stream lit up with emojis, laughter flooding the feed. Viewers typed fast, mocking the man in the wrinkled coat, amused by the spectacle. The crowd in the lobby smirked with them, feeding the performance. Yet across the room, Nora's lens captured something entirely different. The quiet man, standing the receptionist's smirk, the indifference in every glance. Two stories began at once, one crafted for cheap entertainment, the other for truth. Harlan remained still, his eyes fixed on the desk before him, unshaken by the noise that tried to reduce him to a joke. The live stream mocked, but Nora's silent recording carried a different weight. It was patience against mockery, permanence against noise. Only one of them would last. Harlan's eyelids lowered for a moment, shutting out the marble, the sneers, the clicking keys that pretended to search. His breath left him slow-measured. Behind his closed eyes, the past returned the boy. At 17, banished from the kitchen doors, watching the glow of wealth through a narrow crack. The memory pressed close, vivid, as if it had never left. Yet, when he opened his eyes again, the boy was gone. What remained was the man who had built, endured, and chosen not to wear his power like armor. The insult was the same, but the weight had shifted. He was not standing there to prove himself, he was testing them, watching how they would treat a stranger when no spotlight pressed down. His silence was not surrender but a trial, and every second they failed it, the judgment deepened. What once broke him now became the measure of others, and none of them knew it. The uniformed guard shifted closer, his boots clicking softly against the marble. His voice carried no anger, only the weight of procedure turned into prejudice. "Sir, if you have no identification, I must ask you to step away from the counter." The words echoed with authority but rang hollow, a judgment already made before proof was asked. Harlan lifted his eyes to meet the man's, steady and unflinching, as if searching for something human beneath the mask of protocol. He said nothing. The silence stretched, filling the space with more pressure than protest ever could. At the desk, Sloane's arms folded across her chest. Her lips curled into a small victorious smile, convinced the moment had ended in her favor. Guests leaned forward in their seats, sensing the climax of a humiliation. But what they mistook for surrender was only patience. Harlan was waiting, and none of them recognized that the balance in the room had already begun to tilt. The laughter that had rippled through the lobby moments before began to fade. One chuckle, then another, fell quiet, leaving behind an uneasy hush. The guests waited, breath shallow, expecting a scene to erupt, a raised voice, an argument, something loud to match the tension. But there was none. Harlan remained fixed in place, tall and unmoving, his presence more solid than the marble beneath him. His stillness unsettled the air, a figure carved from patience refusing to bend. The receptionist tapped a finger idly, her smirk stiffening under the weight of the silence she had not expected. The guard held his stance, though doubt flickered at the edge of his gaze. Around them, the entire room shifted from mockery to unease, from laughter to anticipation. It felt like standing at the edge of a storm, the quiet more frightening than thunder. They didn't know it yet, but the breaking point was no longer his, it was theirs. The stillness held until it grew unbearable, the lobby drowning in its own expectation. All eyes converged on the man at the counter, waiting for him to retreat, to lash out, to fail. Instead, Harlan moved slowly, deliberately. He slipped a hand into his coat and drew out his phone. No rush, no visible anger, just a quiet resolve. His thumb tapped once, a short line appearing on the screen. "Confirm meeting status. I may cancel." With a single gesture, the message was sent. He returned the phone to his pocket, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable. To those watching, it seemed insignificant, a man hiding in technology to avoid confrontation. But the weight of that line had already begun to ripple outward, far beyond the marble walls. The lobby still thought the story was theirs to mock. They did not realize the storm had already been called, and soon it would arrive through the very doors they ignored. A low rumble swelled from outside, steady and unhurried, a sound that carried more weight than volume. Heads turned as glass doors reflected the shape of a Rolls-Royce Phantom gliding to a stop. Its surface gleamed silver under the city light, every line of its body a declaration without words. The valet, who moments ago had laughed behind his hand, froze mid-step, the keys he held nearly slipping from his grasp. At the entrance, the doorman stiffened his posture, betraying nerves he couldn't disguise. Conversations faltered, whispers dimmed. Guests began craning their necks, curiosity stirring unease. The car door remained closed, but the silence it commanded swept through the marble lobby, cracking the certainty of those who had mocked. What they had dismissed as trivial seconds earlier now trembled with the unmistakable presence of power. It was not loud, not rushed. It was inevitable, and it was coming for them. The doors opened with a hush, and 3 figures entered without hesitation. Ethan Crowell led the way, his stride sharp, his gaze unwavering. Behind him, Clara Vance held a tablet close to her chest, her eyes sweeping the room with practiced precision. Grant Ellery followed, broad-shouldered, silent, his presence enough to anchor the group. They didn't pause to acknowledge the stares or the confusion rippling across the lobby. Their movements were synchronized, every step deliberate, the kind of rhythm that belonged to people accustomed to carrying weight far heavier than appearances. Ethan's voice cut through the stillness, calm but resonant. "Mr. West. Everything is ready." The sound landed like thunder, muffled under velvet quiet, yet undeniable. The name cracked the air open, rearranging the balance instantly. The guests no longer laughed. The lobby no longer judged. Power had declared itself not with spectacle, but with certainty. All color seemed to drain from Sloane Archer's features at once. The red of her lipstick dulled her carefully set composure, unraveling. Her hand twitched, fingers brushing against the edge of the desk as though reaching for stability. On the marble in front of her still lay the black card, untouched, the very object she had mocked. Her eyes darted toward it, then back to the man who had never raised his voice, never defended himself. Her mouth parted, But no sound came, air caught in her throat, pride collapsing into fear. Around her, gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests leaned back in their chairs, expressions shifting from amusement to disbelief. The narrative they had written in their whispers dissolved in a single breath. Sloane's silence was louder than her words had ever been. In that instant, the joke ended, and the truth she had refused to see stood undeniable before her. The echo of hurried steps cut through the silence, and Miles Trent, the hotel manager, emerged from the corridor. His tie hung loose, his breath uneven, his complexion drained. He scanned the lobby, his eyes catching on the man at the counter, and the weight of recognition dragged his expression into panic. "Mr. West." "Please," he stammered, his voice quivering. "This is just a misunderstanding." The words spilled too quickly, desperate to build a bridge over the ruins left by his staff. His hands fluttered in half gestures, trying to gather authority he no longer possessed. But Harlan didn't answer. He turned his gaze on Miles with the same calmness he had shown the receptionist, the same silence that pressed heavier than scorn. It wasn't anger, it was judgment. And in that gaze, Miles felt the full collapse of control. His words meant to repair only revealed the cracks deeper. The room belonged to Harlan now, and no plea could change that. The lobby held its breath as Harlan finally broke his silence. His voice was low, steady, each word deliberate, heavy with meaning. "Opportunity doesn't arrive under spotlights. It comes quietly, and most people miss it because they're too busy looking at shoes." The sentence hung in the air, sharp as glass, undeniable in its truth. Not a soul stirred. The receptionist's smirk had vanished. The guard lowered his eyes, and the guests who had laughed minutes earlier sat motionless. The paradox of his words struck deeper than any rebuke. In a place built to dazzle, he had stripped the glitter away, leaving only the reflection of their own prejudice. The lesson was not shouted, it was carved into silence. Those present felt it settle against their skin like frost. Respect stripped of performance revealed itself not as a gift, but as a starting point they had failed to honor. Harlan turned slow and certain, the black card still lying on the desk, untouched. Each step he took carried the weight of finality, not rushed, not loud, but heavy enough to echo in every watching mind. He did not glance back. Behind him, Ethan, Clara, and Grant followed in perfect rhythm, their silence amplifying his. The procession moved toward the glass doors like a verdict already written. The lobby remained frozen, staff-paralyzed guests struck dumb. The laughter that once filled the air had vanished, replaced by a hush so sharp it cut deeper than noise. Everyone knew what had just slipped from their grasp. It wasn't merely a guest. It wasn't even just a client. It was a chance worth billions dissolved in silence. And as the doors closed behind him, the marble lobby stood in its polished emptiness, aware that what had left was not only money, but dignity itself. The conference room felt smaller than usual, the weight of silence pressing against its walls. Miles Trent stood at the head of the long table, his tie pulled loose, his voice hoarse from strain. "We are no longer a brand," he said, each word heavy. "We are a warning." The statement fell like a stone into still water, and its ripples reached every face around the table. Department heads avoided each other's eyes, some twisting pens nervously, others staring down at empty notepads. No one spoke. At the far end, Sloane sat with her head bowed, hands trembling in her lap, the earlier confidence stripped away until only silence remained. Her reflection in the glossy table showed a face she no longer recognized. Fear moved through the room in waves, not of Harlan West, but of the mirror he had forced them to see. The damage was no longer private. It was written into their reputation, and every second of silence confirmed it. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke, fragile as paper. "I didn't know who he was." The words trembled into the air, thin, defensive, desperate. Miles turned on her, his face carved with disappointment deeper than anger. "That's the problem," he said, cutting her short. "You didn't need to know. Respect comes first. Always." His words struck like a hammer, reverberating through the room. Sloane's shoulders collapsed inward, her breath catching. She pressed her hands together, her fingers cold against her palms, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. She tried to hold herself steady, but the weight of the truth left her exposed. The power games, the smirk, the false superiority, all of it had dissolved into shame. Around her no one spoke, no one defended her. The silence of her colleagues sealed the verdict. Her downfall wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, private, and absolute. Beyond the boardroom, the world was no longer waiting. Nora's recording had already reached 2 million views in 3 hours, spreading like fire across platforms. The caption was a simple $2.8 billion lost to arrogance. Headlines followed, each sharper than the last. Tech titan walks out. Respect costs billions. On TikTok, the video was stitched with reactions, shock, anger, and laughter at the hotel's downfall. On Twitter, threads dissected every frame, turning the lobby into a case study in corporate bias. Reddit swelled with comments, comparisons, and outrage, naming staff one by one. The story was no longer just about Harlan West. It had become a symbol, a warning carved into the fabric of the internet. Every meme, every retweet, every comment fueled the blaze. For the hotel, there was no undoing it. Their marble floors and gold trim could not hide the truth anymore. Their reputation had become a lesson, and the world was savoring the fallout. The storm outside grew louder, each hour headlines circling, reporters stationed at Coltech's doors, cameras waiting for a statement that never came. Yet inside, Harlan West remained still. He neither posted nor appeared on broadcasts. The world demanded his voice, but he gave them only silence. He sat at his desk, scrolling through hundreds of messages. Congratulations, outrage, apologies. Each one carried urgency. Each one begged for acknowledgement. He read them all with the same calm detachment, his face unchanged. Then his hand paused over a single unopened file on his desk. The weight of choice lingered there, heavier than any word he could speak to the press. For Harlan, power was not in noise, but in restraint. He didn't need to explain what the world had already witnessed. The silence itself had become his answer, more eloquent than any interview. The decision, however, was yet to come, waiting inside that unopened file. The boardroom was stripped of chatter. On the table before him, two folders rested side by side. The first, Ellington Hotels, thick with contracts, promises, and a letter of apology gilded in careful phrasing. The second, Human, stays thin, unadorned, but clear in its commitment to transparency and respect. Harlan studied neither for long. His hand pressed Ellington's folder aside, sliding it toward the edge of the table without hesitation. He pulled Human stays closer, the decision as natural as breathing. No speech, no debate. The choice spoke for itself. Coltech would stand beside values, not spectacle. The shock of his move rippled across the room, but no one challenged it. In that moment, the second twist revealed itself. Ellington's wealth had not been enough, and the smaller name carried the greater weight. The deal was no longer about billions. It was about principle, and Harlan chose without looking back. Later that night, Harlan opened a blank draft. His fingers moved slowly, carefully, but the words came short and clear. Respect isn't earned. It's owed, always. He stopped there. No flourish, no justifications, no corporate gloss. The line was sent to tens of thousands of employees across continents. As screens lit up in offices, homes, and quiet train rides, the message appeared short enough to read at a glance, powerful enough to stay long after. Some employees leaned back, smiling faintly. Others nodded to themselves, feeling the weight of recognition. Across the company, silence followed, not empty but full, each person understanding what it meant. It wasn't just a policy. It was a mirror held up to who they were and who they were expected to remain. The message was not about the hotel nor the deal. It was about identity forged into a single line that needed no further explanation. Among the flood of messages, one email stood apart. Its subject line was simple: "Thank you." The sender, Arjun Mata, a modest CEO from Mumbai. His words were spare, but they carried years of weight. "Years ago, I was denied entry to a VIP lounge because I did not look like wealth. I walked away in silence. Today, you walked away for all of us." Harlan read the note once, then again, then a third time, the lines deepening in his brow. He did not reply. He only sat in silence, letting the words root themselves. It was not just gratitude. It was recognition across oceans, proof that dignity denied in one place echoed in countless others. The letter became more than correspondence. It was a witness, proof of how far a single act of quiet defiance could travel. The studio lights fell soft as Nora Whitman sat before the camera, her backpack at her feet, her voice steady. "I didn't know who he was," she said. "I only saw someone being ignored. And I thought, if I don't record this, who will?" Behind her, the clip replayed Harlan standing silent, the receptionist's disdain etched in every frame. The video rolled again and again, not as spectacle, but as proof. Across networks, millions watched, and the comments poured like a tide, people recalling moments they too had been dismissed, overlooked, unseen. Nora had not sought to be a witness, but she had become one, and in doing so she changed the course of a story that might have vanished. A quiet figure in the corner had become the voice of countless others, turning silence into revelation. Night draped the city, its skyline burning bright from the 49th floor. Harlan stood before the glass, no toast raised, no celebration in sight. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, no revenge, no pride, only quiet resolve. Respect had never been a trophy to win, but the ground on which every step should begin. Have you ever been misjudged? If you know that sting, leave a line. I have too. Because respect is not a reward. It is the default. And to you who chose this story among thousands, thank you. Your time here matters.